The old mechanic wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag, sighing as he glanced around his nearly empty shop. Business had been slow, and he could feel the weight of unpaid bills stacking up in his mind. But even through his own struggles, he never turned away someone in need. That was just the kind of man he was. The familiar sound of a rattling engine pulled his attention toward the entrance. A small battered sedan rolled into the shop, coughing and sputtering before finally giving up completely. The driver, a young woman with tired eyes, hesitated before stepping out. She looked worried. No, more than worried, desperate. "Morning," the mechanic greeted, forcing a smile as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. "What seems to be the problem?" The woman swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the strap of her worn-out purse. "It just died on me. It's been making this awful noise for a while, and now it won't start at all." She lowered her gaze. "I don't have much, but I really need it fixed. I just got this job, and if I miss work again, I'll—" She stopped, shaking her head as if trying to push the thought away. The mechanic nodded, already rolling up his sleeves. "Let me take a look." He popped the hood, glancing at the engine. The damage was worse than he expected. This wasn't a simple fix. It needed serious work. He knew right away it would cost more than she could likely afford. Minutes passed in silence as he worked, his mind racing. He had his own financial problems to worry about, but looking at the woman's anxious face, he made a decision. "Mom," he said finally, dusting off his hands. "You got somewhere to be right now." She shook her head. "All right," he said. "Why don't you wait inside? I'll take care of it." Her eyes widened. "But I don't know if I can pay for—" "Don't worry about that right now." He cut in gently. "Let's just get your car running first." She hesitated, searching his face for a reason why he would do such a thing. But she didn't find pity in his expression, only kindness. Finally she nodded, whispering, "Thank you." Hours passed as he worked tirelessly, replacing worn-out parts, fixing what had been neglected for far too long. He didn't take shortcuts. He wanted to make sure she wouldn't have to worry about breaking down again anytime soon. By the time he was done, the sun had begun its slow descent in the sky. He wiped the sweat from his brow and walked back into the shop, where the woman sat nervously, tapping her foot against the floor. "All set," he said, with a small smile. She stood up quickly, as if she hadn't believed this moment would come. "It's really done?" "Yup." He tossed her the keys. "Shouldn't give you any more trouble." She stared at the keys in her hands, then at him. "How much do I owe you?" He hesitated. He could see the way she clutched her purse, already bracing herself for an amount she couldn't afford. "Nothing," he said finally. "Consider it a favor." Tears welled in her eyes. I can't accept that. You worked so hard." "It's all right," he assured her. "Just promise me something, okay, when you're in a position to help someone else." "Do it." She wiped at her eyes, nodding. "I will. I swear, I will." She drove off that evening, her car running smoothly for the first time in years. She couldn't stop thinking about the man's kindness. A stranger who had no reason to help her had given her a second chance, without expecting anything in return. But what neither of them knew was that this simple act of kindness was about to change everything. Because just days later, a black luxury car would pull into that same mechanic shop, and the man who stepped out would not be looking for car repairs. He would be looking for the mechanic himself. The mechanic had nearly forgotten about the young woman by the time the sleek black car pulled into his shop. He was elbow deep in an oil change, humming an old tune under his breath, when the low rumble of an expensive engine broke the silence. He turned, wiping his hands on his rag, and frowned at the sight. This wasn't the kind of car that usually rolled up to his little shop. The vehicle was spotless, the kind you only saw in the driveways of the rich or on magazine covers. The driver's door opened slowly, and a tall man stepped out, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. Everything about him screamed wealth: his polished shoes, the way he carried himself, the sharp watch on his wrist. But his expression was unreadable. The mechanic glanced around, half expecting to see cameras, like it was some kind of setup. He'd spent years fixing cars for folks who could barely scrape by. People in suits like this, they didn't come here. "Can I help you?" the mechanic asked, squinting against the glare of the afternoon sun. The man studied him for a moment before stepping forward. "You're the one who fixed a woman's car a few days ago," he said, his voice calm but firm. "For free." The mechanic stiffened slightly. He wasn't in trouble, was he? He nodded slowly. Yeah, she needed help. A small smirk tugged at the corner of the man's mouth. Interesting. He slipped a hand into his pocket, as if considering something. "Did you know who she was?" The mechanic frowned. "Just someone who needed her car fixed." "Why?" The man chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Of course you wouldn't know. She never told you." He exhaled, almost as if he were impressed. "That woman is my sister." The mechanic's eyes widened slightly, but he stayed silent, waiting for the man to explain. "My family is... well, you can probably guess," the man said, gesturing toward his car. "We come from money, a lot of it. But my sister, she wanted something different. She walked away from it all, said she wanted to make it on her own. No help, no handouts." He shook his head, as if the idea still baffled him. "We tried to tell her it would be hard, but she wouldn't listen. And she was. Right, it has been hard." The mechanic thought back to the young woman's face. How exhausted she had looked. How she had hesitated before even asking for help. He had assumed she was just another struggling worker, trying to keep things together. He never would have guessed she had walked away from a life of wealth. "So," the man continued, taking a slow step forward, "when she told me about what you did, I had to see for myself." The mechanic crossed his arms. "See what exactly?" The man studied him, his sharp eyes searching for something. "If you were real," he said simply, "people don't just do things like that, not without expecting something in return. But you fixed her car, gave her your time, and didn't ask for a single cent. That's rare." The mechanic shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "Just did what felt right." The man nodded, as if that was the answer he had expected. "That's exactly why I'm here," he said, his voice turning serious. "I want to make you an offer." The mechanic tensed. He had a bad feeling about this. "I'm not looking for handouts," he said firmly. The man chuckled. "I figured you'd say that, but this isn't charity. It's an opportunity." He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside is a check, a blank one. You write whatever amount you think your kindness was worth. No limits. The mechanic stared at the envelope, his chest tightening. "It's not about the money," he muttered. "I know," the man said, his voice softer now. "But I also know your shop isn't doing well. I saw the bills stacked up in your office when I walked in. You're struggling, just like my sister. You helped her when you didn't have to. Let me help you now." The mechanic swallowed. His hands clenched at his sides. He thought about all. The nights he had spent worrying about keeping his shop running. The times he had skipped meals just to pay for parts. The sleepless hours, wondering if he could afford to stay open another month. And now, right in front of him, was a way out, a way to fix everything. But something didn't feel right. He looked up at the man, searching his face. "Why me?" The man smiled. "Because my sister believes in you, and so do I." For the first time in a long time, the mechanic felt truly seen. But the question still lingered in his mind. Was this really a gift? Or was there something more to it? And as he hesitated, the man's smile didn't waver. If anything, it grew wider, as if he already knew the answer. The mechanic's fingers hovered over the envelope. The weight of it wasn't in the paper. It was in what it meant. A way to fix his struggles. A way to keep his shop running. A way to finally breathe. But something about it unsettled him. He had never been the kind of man to take money for doing the right thing. That wasn't why he had helped the woman. He did it because she needed it, because he had once been in her shoes, standing in front of a stranger, hoping for a little kindness. He let out a slow breath and placed the envelope back on the counter. "I appreciate it," he said carefully, "but I can't take this." The man's smile faltered, just slightly. "Are you sure?" The mechanic nodded. "If I start putting a price on kindness, it stops being kindness. I don't want that." For a long moment, the man just stared at him, as if he were trying to figure him out. Then, to the mechanic's surprise, he laughed. Genuine, deep laughter. That echoed through the shop. "You really are something else," the man said, shaking his head in amusement. "No wonder my sister was so moved by what you did." The mechanic offered a small smile, still unsure what to make of the situation. "She's tough. She'll be all right." The man nodded. "Yeah, she will. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't look out for the people who do the right thing when no one's watching." The mechanic frowned, about to ask what he meant, when the man turned toward the door. "You won't take money, and I respect that. But that doesn't mean I can't help in my own way." Before the mechanic could respond, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek business card, placing it on the counter where the envelope had been. "My family owns a chain of auto shops. Big ones. We're always looking for honest mechanics. If you ever change your mind, call me." With that, he walked to his car, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of expensive cologne and the sound of the luxury engine roaring to life. The mechanic stood there for a long time, staring at the card. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a door to an entirely different life. But as he looked around his small, worn-down shop, he realized something. He didn't want to work for a big company. He didn't want wealth or fancy suits. He wanted this, the little garage that had been his home for years. The people who walked in with broken cars and broken spirits, hoping for someone to just listen. He picked up the card, turned it over in his hand, then tucked it into his toolbox. Maybe he'd never use it. Maybe he would. But for now, he had work to do. And as he rolled up his sleeves and got back under the hood of another old car, he couldn't help but smile. Because no matter how much money or success someone had, the real measure of a person wasn't in what they owned. It was in what they gave without expecting anything in return.